with Eric DeCosta, General Manager of the Baltimore Ravens, and we appreciate your time, man.
Excited to be here. Welcome back.
So, it's good to be back. I want to go back. Let's just start here. Lamar Jackson, the hardest thing to do in your job, right, is to find the quarterback, and you've got the quarterback. I want to go back, though, to that process. Correct me if I'm wrong. I remember it as that was kind of like hand the baton year with Ozzie, right?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah.
And so you're making the decision, but Ozzie's that's his last year, like official capacity, I believe. And you wind up drafting Lamar as the 5th quarterback in that class. What did you guys see in Lamar, and what is memorable still to this day as part of that process, and how you landed on him and decided, you know what, he's still there, end of the first round, let's trade up, let's go get him. He can be our guy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I first think it goes back to just the fall evaluation. And we had a couple scouts, Milt Hendrickson being one, Dwan Jones being the other guy. They went into Louisville that year, came back, and basically said, this guy's a special athlete. And this guy can do a lot of things that are unique at our level of football. Now, there's some things to work on, of course, like all players, but he's a unique player. And so, I watched him. Joe Ortiz, our college director at the time, watched him. At some point, we brought him to Ozzie. Ozzie looked at him. I would typically bring players to Ozzie to look at. He and I always worked together in the draft for 25 years before I became GM. And so, he became a player that we were very interested in. The challenge for us was Joe Flacco was still our quarterback.
Yep. Right.
And, they're very, very different. And how do we add a player like Lamar and not take away from Joe or change the offense dramatically? So we were fortunate that we had on staff that year Marty Morningweg and James Urban, both guys that had coached Michael Vick. And so they had an experience with a mobile quarterback. They understood, what types of plays Lamar would flourish in. And so they loved the skill set. But the whole challenge was he's so different from Joe Flacco. And we looked at it like, okay, we have the traditional pocket passer with Joe Flacco. Lamar is dynamic in his own way. We think he's going to get better as a pocket passer. How do they coexist? How does our offense coexist? What's it going to look like? And what players can we add around those two guys to make both those guys be successful? And so that year, what I remember most is Lamar did not have an agent. And it was, we wanted to bring him into Baltimore. We're very secretive in Baltimore. We don't want to be connected to players. You'll never really, if you see us connected to a player, that probably means we're not connected to that
right.
player.
We've learned.
So I don't ever want to be connected to anybody. So the challenge was, how do we get Lamar Jackson to come visit us in Baltimore? We didn't bring any other quarterbacks in that year. We did like some quarterbacks. We figured they wouldn't be there when we picked.
Right.
So we felt like Lamar might be the one guy that had a chance to be there in the 20s when we picked. One of my jobs as a scouting director at that time was to assess league value. How do other teams feel about these players? That's a big part of my job, it still is. And I felt like Lamar would be there in the 20s, maybe in the 30s, but definitely in the 20s. And so how do we get him? We brought him into Baltimore. The nice thing about a player that doesn't have an agent, there's no leaks.
Yeah.
Right? No one knew that Lamar Jackson spent a day and a half with us in Baltimore. I got one call from somebody in the media. They said, I heard Lamar Jackson might have visited you guys. I said, no. Can you prove it? Why do you say that?
Yeah.
He goes, well, I just kind of caught rumblings of it. I said, well, if you want to report it, you can, but you might be wrong. I'm not going to say one way or the other. Well, it turned he did spend a day with us. So at some point then, as we got closer to the draft, the idea was to get as many picks as we could, to trade back as many times as we could, either take Lamar or draft another player, but have a backup plan we might get back in.
Yep.
And Howie Roseman's a guy that, he always makes trades. He loves to make trades. He and I have made a lot of trades together. We're pretty active on draft day, mostly going back. And, I learned from the Joe Flacco trade. We had the 8th pick. We went back to 26 and we went back up to 22. We got Flacco. That if you assess league value, you can go back and still get your quarterback.
Right.
And so the idea was we were going to do the same thing with Lamar as we did with Joe. So we went, Howie was willing to trade. We went back. We ended up drafting Hayden Hurst because we went back and we went back again. We ended up getting some 2/3 and a 4th as well. But Howie was willing to trade out of 32 and take our 2nd and give us 32. So we ended up drafting Hayden Hurst at 25. Kevin Byrne, our PR guy, wanted us to go downstairs to the press conference. Kevin, let's just hold off. The scouts and coaches, they thought we were
Day
done.
one, yeah.
They thought we were done.
Done for the night, yeah.
So Ozzie would always sit at the head of the table, still does. I sit to his right. Steve Bisciotti's across the way, talking to John. They're high-fiving, they're happy, whatever. I looked at Ozzie and I go, let's call Howie. And he said, you want to? I said, yeah, let's call him. So I call Howie. Howie says, I want to do it. So I looked at Ozzie. I said, get Lamar on the phone. Ozzie called Lamar. I'm on the phone with Howie. We did the trade. We turned it in. No one even knew in the room that we were doing it. No one was paying attention.
That's
Like, what?
wild.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I go, hey guys, we just got Lamar Jackson. And the room just went crazy.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah.
What a story.
Yeah.
So you get Lamar, and DeJuan Jones, we played with at Richmond. Kevin Whittle worked with them. I've talked to them just about like how supportive everyone has been in that organization and early on, and kind of what the coaching staff had to do and how like really tailored things towards Lamar. But I'm curious from like your standpoint, right? You get your guy, and a couple of years in, a year or two in, he's the guy.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, what is your thought process as general manager? What are you thinking in terms of how do we best support Lamar? Is it put a great defense around him? Mm-hmm. And not even just the personnel, but also how do we get him to a position off the field, like all the different aspects that come with supporting a superstar quarterback. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so you try to figure out what he does best and then what kinds of players he likes to throw the ball to. And so in his case, it's actually coincidental, but also, we were lucky that he loves to throw to tight ends.
Yes.
Right? So we had drafted Hayden Hurst, ended up trading Hayden. But Hayden and Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
Right.
So he had these like really comfort pieces for him. And then offensive line wise, and so that same draft class, we drafted Mark Andrews and we drafted Orlando Brown. And we had Ronnie Stanley and Kevin Zeitler. We built an offensive line around him that suited what we do, which is run the football. We believe in having good backs, so we added backs. We added Mark Ingram that first year. We drafted J.K. Dobbins. We signed Gus Edwards as an undrafted guy. But over the years, Justice Hill was a good player for us now. Derrick Henry. We've always had like multiple backs.
Yeah.
That we can rotate and guys will be productive. And we've always try to add speed to the field. We feel like Lamar being the type of player he is, he presents so many challenges for linebackers in the front. And, getting guys outside. So we drafted Hollywood. We drafted Zay. We drafted Bate. We've allocated a lot of resources. We don't have that. The one piece we probably have missed on is that big X presence. We've never really had that. We've tried to find that guy. That guy doesn't go on trees, right?
Yeah.
They're hard to find those
right.
kind of guys, right? That's probably the one thing. But for us, it's always been, okay, offensive line, first and foremost. Keep it strong. Now, we made some changes this year. We had some guys leave, but I think the line this year, we ended up pretty good. But we allocate a lot of resources to the offensive line, running backs, tight ends, and receivers. But then also, I think on defense, we've always been a stingy defense in terms of preventing the run. Okay, we're a ball control team. We like to control the ball. 4 minute, 6 minute, whatever it is. We want to make sure if we get in the fourth quarter of a game, we have the lead. We're tough to play against.
Yeah.
We want to choke the other team out. Basically, we want to run the ball, take our shots downfield, but control the clock. So part of that is not letting the other team control the ball. Right, so we have a strong defensive line. We stop the run as best as we can. Our secondary wasn't that great this year, as good as it could have been. It came on the second half of the season. But what we saw this year with Lamar and the growth with Lamar is we became a team this year that could come back from double-digit deficits, which we've never really been. We've morphed under Todd Munkin and all the different things that we do offensively. Lamar has improved every year as a passer. We've added more talent around him. The line's doing their part. And we went from being a very run-centric offense to being a very balanced team this year that could score in many different ways.
So look, you can find productive players coming out of college. You guys obviously do a good job of identifying talent. But how do you figure out how to get the right people in your organization? What's the process look like of discovering whether or not a guy is a Raven?
Great question. We spend most of our time thinking about that. I tell the scouts all the time, we need the best people finding the best players. So it starts with the scouts, right? And so I'm proud that, I started out as a guy I'm a lifer with the Ravens. I started out when I was 24 years old as an in-house player personnel assistant. and under Ozzie and Phil Savage, and there's a way that we train our guys and develop our guys and what we look for, the qualities, whether it's been a Joe Ortiz, a Joe Douglas, a Chad Alexander, Andy Weidel, Ian Cunningham. We've
got
had
a little bit of a tree
millions of
growing right
guys.
now.
That's a great
We've had a
tree.
million guys, and I believe in what we do. And so our scouts understand, the qualities that we're looking for, the background, whether it's growth mindset, pride, attention to detail, durability, leadership qualities, whatever that entails. All those different things kind of go into our formula, right? And then we build out what we call a football GPA, and it's based on a 4-point scale. Every player that we evaluate gets assigned a grade. And so we have the football grade, and then we have this kind of football GPA. We combine the two of those things, and that's really how we rank our plays and what we come up with the board.
That's awesome. Is there, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, is there a player or two during the course of your career when you sat down with them and you had a chance to spend time with them, you were like, man, this guy's a Raven if I've ever seen a Raven?
Yeah, there's been a lot of guys. I can give you a couple of recent guys. 22 draft, Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum. Our first 2 picks. Both guys, I think, destined for greatness. Unbelievable makeup. A guy like Marshall Yanda, another guy that I would put in there. Haloti Nada. Ed Reed was a guy that I remember interviewing back in the day. So we've had a lot of, and they come in all different shapes and sizes, backgrounds. It doesn't really matter where they come from. Like, I think, it doesn't matter. You come from the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest, the West Coast. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what division you play at. They're all different. But you're looking for these similar qualities that we believe make great players. And we make mistakes. We made a million. I could give you 5 guys we made mistakes on. Bad mistakes. Like, I literally would have said to you, this guy's a stone cold assassin. This is one of the greatest picks we've ever had.
We all got a hit list, right?
And then 6 months later, I'm going, oh my God, this guy's absolutely terrible. Why did I pick this guy? And it happens every year. We want to be right about, if we could be right 75% of the time, we're going to be better than most of the other teams.
That's a good hit rate.
That's our goal, is to get to 75% or higher with our draft class. Now, that doesn't mean that a 6th-round pick's going to be a starter. I'm not saying that. But guys that can come in and add value to our organization and contribute in different ways, if we can get to 75%, we feel pretty good about it.
You play in a conference, right? With Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. You've got your guy, obviously, but you talk about a slim margin for error. It's unbelievable. You guys have a great football team. You've built it the right way. You've got the quarterback. You have a great football team, and it feels like this close, right? And there's a lot of teams that say this. I'm curious for you now, all right, so here we go in the offseason. We're at the Senior Bowl. We're getting ready for the Combine. We've got free agency. Take us through the challenges of kind of walking that tightrope of we've got so many great parts. We've got to maintain that. But how do we get some kind of competitive edge, whether it's a piece here or something that we try to do different and tinker with the coaching, whatever it is. When you wake up after the season's over, take us through your thought processes. All right, how do we get just a little bit better?
Right, so I'll tell you, when our season ends, I think people would expect me to be miserable. It's one of the happiest days of the year for me because I know now I can be a part of the solution, right? When you're in the season, if you're a GM in the season, you're like a hostage to the carnage that's going to take place out there. And I despise that.
I've never heard that.
I despise the feeling of waking up on a Monday. If you talk to anybody that knows me, they would say, Eric DeCosta is an absolute asshole on Mondays after games because I'm not in control. I'm like you guys watching games. It's miserable.
Yeah.
When the season ends, I'm all about how do we get better? What's the solution? What are the areas we can exploit? How do we find value? What are the small little margins we can play in to get better as a football team? And so I love it. And we always try to be innovative. We'll look at the roster. We'll look at how do we save money? Who should we sign? How many comp picks do we have? How can we get more comp picks? We at the end of the season, we claimed Deontay Johnson after we cut him. And people were like, what the hell are the Ravens doing? They cut the guy. He goes to Houston and gets cut.
Yeah.
And the Ravens claim him. He can't play for anybody now. Well, we did that because there's a small chance that he signs a contract for more than $2.5 million. And if he does that, he qualifies for a comp pick.
Yeah.
So those are the things that really motivate me. How do we gain a small advantage?
Mhm.
How do we gain a big advantage, right? You can go get Derrick Henry, you get a huge advantage.
Right.
For me, part of the excitement is how do we just keep getting all these small advantages that roll into something big? And so it is tough with the salary cap. You hate to see good players leave. Last year we lost a slew of good players on defense, right? We had all these guys last year that overperformed. We lost all those guys last year. Well, you know what? We replaced them. We traded Morgan Moses on offense. We let Kevin Zeitler walk. You know what? Our running game was better than it was last year, and Lamar got sacked less. So that's what motivates me is how do you take advantage? Because, the reality of it is if you have a good team, right, you spend a lot of money on players, you can't keep everybody. You become a victim of your own success by drafting really good players. So you have to find all these little small ways of gaining advantage, and that's what I love.
I feel like we've kind of gotten through the era of the great debate of like nerds versus meatheads, analytics versus game tape and all that. But and it seems like every organization that I've talked to, it kind of settled into how they utilize technology and analytics and those sorts of things. What do you utilize? What do you find to be helpful? What are the things that you've tried to, as technology has become more and more a part of this game in every facet, what have you found to be really helpful for your job?
So the first way that we've really, I think, used technology and analytics is just developing our own software. And I think we have an unbelievable product that we started developing in probably 2013. It's very, very advanced. We have 2 developers, full-time developers on staff with football backgrounds.
Is it for sale?
No, it's not for sale. Unfortunately, no. We've worked, I'll tell you, some of the best tweaks we've made are ideas that I've gotten from the Orioles because they're very advanced.
Interesting.
And I've looked at their software and we've added components. So that's the first thing. The second piece, though, really is the modeling that we do. We do pro modeling and we do college scouting modeling, which basically assigns a grade to every player. And that's a part of the process. And so that grade, along with the scout grades, and in some ways that grade is driven by scout grades, but a lot of other stuff too that we use. For instance, Madden ratings. Who would ever think that an NFL team would use Madden ratings in one of their models? Well, we do. I'm giving you just a small piece of what we do.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So we have these models that we use, and it spits out grades and values for players, and we use those. And in some cases, we can look back and say, you know what? The model is actually 3% better than our scouts grades in terms of predicting what the player is going to do. 2 or 3%.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Now, again, the model is taking aspects of the scout grades, components,
Right.
for instance. So, for instance, if you're a running back and, the model thinks that, say, instincts and vision is really important, they're going to pull that information into the model. Hands for receivers.
Right.
That information from the scouts is going to get pulled into the model. But they're also taking other stuff, outside information that we're using, that we subscribe to, player performance stuff, player tracking, GPS stuff, and that all goes into it. And every single college player gets assigned a grade. How does that help us? Well, say you have 4 scouts that go into Saginaw Valley State and they give free agent grades to every prospect there, and the model comes back and says there's one guy there that has a draftable grade. We're going to see that, and we're going to assign that player to other people, and we're going to get additional looks.
Right.
The other way it's helpful is if we have a player, 2 players, say we have 2 receivers, they're graded identically by the scouts, and I can't split the tie. The model will chime in and say, this guy's better. Well, why is he better? And I can say, why is he better? Well, he's younger. Now, that might seem counterintuitive, but a younger player has a chance to develop more than an older player.
That makes sense.
So we defer to the model in that case. So that's kind of what we do, I would say, in a nutshell.
Great. That's fascinating. Can you talk about the synergy between you and the coaching staff, how you guys work together during this time?
Yeah, so I've been blessed to work with Ozzie for 29 years, and I've had a chance to watch him with Coach Marchabroda, Brian Billick, and Coach Harbaugh. Very different personalities, different types of relationships, but always thrived. And when I would see other teams, the majority of the dysfunction in organizations is usually between coaching staffs and GMs and scouting staffs. We've never had that. And so I think it's a division of labor. It's being a good partner. It's having a great owner. Understanding your roles, responsibilities, and then it's communication and it's inclusion. And so like for us, our scouts are our coaches are a big part of the scouting process. In some organizations, the coaches may not even be a part of the process. They may not go to the combine. They may not go to the Senior Bowl. They may not go to the scout meetings. They may not be assigned players. To me, that's crazy. And we've never done that. And I think if your coaches are going to coach your players, they should have a chance to chime in and evaluate and give feedback and all those types of things. Now, some coaches are better evaluators than others.
Yep.
Right? I need to figure that out. But Coach Harbaugh and I talk every single day. Our offices are across from each other. We live next to each other. So, I mean, we can't really be enemies. We live literally next door to each other. But we speak every day about all things football. And I think you have to have that to be successful long term.
We talked to Nick Caserio about his relationship with Bill Belichick, and obviously unique. And your relationship, when I think about your growing up, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, inside the industry, you learned a lot from Ozzie. There's no denying that, and I know you're the first to promote that. If you can just think back, right, all your time with Ozzie, what was the toughest lesson you learned from him?
Yeah, there's a lot, but I would say you have to sometimes do what's right for the organization, even though you know it's the wrong thing to do. And what I mean by that is, like, we had a player that historically was just one of the great Ravens of all time, Anquan Bolden. We traded for Anquan. He was a total stud. As a person, on the field, off the field, just epitomized what it meant to be a Raven. Like a guy that when you went into Pittsburgh, you wanted Anquan.
Right.
And the reality of it is we were in a bad cap situation, and we had to trade him. And we didn't get much for him. And it was a horrible football decision. But we had to do it, and it was hard. And I think sometimes you have to just accept that you have to make the hard decision. We might have made it work. We could have probably finagled some contracts, done some cap deals. We probably would have put ourselves in a worse position in future years had we done that. And Ozzie just has this way of, when the time comes in, we got to do it. So my first year as GM, 2019, I had just taken over. January 19th, I took over and got to the first day of the new league year, and we lost Zadarius Smith, Terrell Suggs, Eric Weddle, and there was one other player, and I can't think of, CJ Mosley. 4 legit Pro Bowl players. We couldn't sign them back. I tried to sign CJ, we couldn't. Zadarius went as a free agent. I had to cut Eric Weddle, and Terrell Suggs signed with Arizona because he wanted to go back to Arizona. And I was just getting crushed. Literally new on the job, right?
Right.
What the hell is this guy doing? It was hard. And I could have finagled a way to keep those guys, some of those guys on the team, probably. I could have overpaid CJ. I could have probably kept Weddle for another year, who I was very close with. We might have overpaid Suggs. But it wasn't the right thing to do at that moment for the club. And so I had to just eat it. I had to do it because it was the right thing to do. It was very hard, and I learned that from Ozzie.
So in our audience, I think there's a handful of people that aspire to become a general manager or work in the NFL. And I've come to realize that I think there are a lot of, you mentioned Madden, I think a lot of Madden GMs that think they can be GMs in the NFL.
Maybe this will encourage them.
Right. But there's only 32 of you out there in the world, right? And it's a unique responsibility that I know you obviously you cherish and you take it to heart. If you now, though, could look back to a young Eric DeCosta, just getting 24 years old, you said, right? Starting in the business, what advice would you give to him?
Realize that you don't know as much as you think you do about the game, number one. Because I'm still now, 30 years later, figuring stuff out, especially like X's and O's wise and like coaching related stuff. As scouts, we evaluate ability and talent, but a lot of scouts don't have any background in terms of X's and O's and what the player is supposed to be doing. So learn the game, accept that you don't know as much. Just because you played 4 years in college, you were a GA for 2 years, doesn't really mean that you know the game. But 2, appreciate what other people do. Build relationships with people in all the other departments. I was blessed. We came from Cleveland. I didn't. I was a GA up in Connecticut at a small school called Trinity College. And I came down, and it's just like those books, that book series, Left Behind. A lot of people got left behind in Cleveland. They weren't invited to Baltimore, so we were very, very small. And it was a blessing for me because I became that guy that would like just have Eric do it. So whether it was a training room, security, equipment, PR, community relations, whatever it was, they would say, just have Eric do it because there was nobody else. And I learned everybody else's job, what their roles were, how the whole thing kind of fits together. It's not, everyone thinks that being a GM is scouting players, drafting players, signing players, and trading players. It's about managing people and solving problems. So if you understand what everybody's role is in the organization and how they all work together, and if you've built important relationships with those people, you'll thrive.
I also want to ask you this. Like, I know for me, we have very different jobs, but for me, it's like with all the TV and the bullshit and the radio and the writing and all this stuff, like when I actually get to sit down and put on the tape, like for me, that's where I'm like, oh, finally, you know? And you could turn the phone off or you could block everything out. For like, what is it for you? What is still to this day your favorite part of the job?
Well, it used to always be scouting. Like, that's my whole identity. I'm proud that I was an area scout. I'm proud that I was a college director and ran the draft. I've always run the draft, you know, since 2004, I've run the draft, still run the draft. I love that aspect of it. But I think now, my biggest weakness is the things that I would always have said to you guys, like I'm nervous about. One would be salary cap and negotiation. Yep. And then two would be relationships with players because I'm not Ozzie Newsome. I'm not in every Hall of Fame. I'm not a 6'4" African-American guy that played at Alabama, right? So I was always nervous about that. I have to say that now in my 6 years GM, I relish getting a deal done, negotiating a deal, right? I've done 2 deals with players, Lamar Jackson, Roquan Smith. I love that. I love the negotiation aspect of the job, managing the cap. But the second thing is really leading the players, getting to know the players, helping the players through challenges that they might be faced with, solving problems, encouraging, in some cases disciplining, that's part of the job. But the relationship, I think, with the players. Now, I'll say this, I still love to scout, right? But I can't just sit there now for hours on end and watch, 4 players and watch 4 games of 4 players. I have to be strategic. I have to figure out when I'm going to do that. So what I started doing, and this is going to sound crazy, but like as we get closest to the draft, on Friday nights, I go to bed at like 8 o'clock and I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I go into the office and I work on Saturday mornings, I work from about 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. And people say, well, why do you do that? Well, my kids are sleeping.
Yeah, I know.
Right, they're sleeping. Yep. So I can get 8 hours worth of tape when there's nobody in the building done, get home and still make my boys pancakes.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a joy to that. For me to be able to succeed, I have to do that.
Well, we appreciate you, man. We appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate everything you've done in this industry. And we've obviously got a lot of people that we've worked with or played with in college that have worked with you. And, best of luck to you moving forward.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for the support.